Welcome to our interview. I'm Victoria Mills, Managing Director on the EDF Plus business team at Environmental Defense Fund. And my guest today is John Monsif, Director of Government Relations at McDonald's. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Victoria. I appreciate it.
So John, why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and your role at McDonald's?
Great. Well, again, thanks so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be here with you today, and certainly want to just point out at the front end, really appreciate your partnership and our work together over the last several years. So I've been with McDonald's for a little over 3 years now, and I work in the federal government relations space for the company. I focus on a number of different issues, including climate, energy, agriculture, among others. And I represent the company on Capitol Hill and with the administration when it comes to those issues. Really have enjoyed my time here at McDonald's. We're doing a lot of great things and excited about the work that we've been doing. Just briefly, my background, I actually started off in sales in the food and beverage industry for a number of years based in Boston before changing careers at 32 and coming to DC to work on Capitol Hill. And spent 7 years on Capitol Hill, serving as a two-time chief of staff and an LD for 3 members. And then ultimately left the Hill and have been lobbying for the last approximately five years now.
Great. Well, shortly after you joined McDonald's in 2017, the company became the first restaurant company to set a science-based greenhouse gas reduction target. What led you to set that goal?
That's a great question. We had new leadership come to McDonald's who really took a look at the business and said, we needed to do things a little differently. And ultimately, we needed to use our scale as a force for good. And one of the areas where we ultimately dove into immediately was the environment. When you feed 69 million people a day, which is 1% of the world's population, a resilient food supply is absolutely critical. So it was critical for the business. But also, we ultimately did this because our consumers are demanding it. Consumers want to feel good about the food they purchase and the food they eat. And ultimately, climate is just a very big issue to our consumers. And so we felt it was important to address those issues.
So obviously, part of addressing climate change is large companies like McDonald's setting and achieving ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets. But I'd love to hear from you about how you see public policy as connected to your environmental and business goals.
That's a great question and a really important question. And just briefly, as you mentioned, we did set science-based targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, both in our supply chain as well as our restaurant. And so our sustainability team immediately started to work to figure out, how do we get to those ambitious goals that we set? And they looked at a number of different levers to pull in order to get there on both the agriculture as well as the restaurant side. And ultimately, in partnership with the sustainability team, it was clear that one of the levers that we thought was absolutely important to pull was policy lever. We felt policy was critically important in order to be able to not only achieve our goals, but quite frankly, to move the needle and make a bigger impact globally. And so for that reason, policy is part of our sustainability strategy to achieve our commitments. And I should note that ultimately, McDonald's will certainly have been in the sustainability space for quite some time now. We never really dove into the policy space here in Washington, D.C. And so ultimately, after making the announcement and working hand in hand with our sustainability team, we determined that it was really important to set very clear policy principles for the company, which ultimately is our path forward to determine what we want to advocate in the environmental space. And so it was a very collaborative internal effort where we established these policy principles. And these policy principles said, first and foremost, that government has a role in addressing climate change. And we encouraged both federal government, state governments, and local governments to pursue policies to hit the Paris Climate Accord targets. And then ultimately, we looked at our business and said there's 4 areas where we ultimately want to focus on. The first is in the agriculture space, the second in the energy space, third around circular economy, and fourth, transportation and logistics. So we really dove into those 4 areas and determined what policies made sense for us to support that ultimately aligned with our sustainability strategies to get to our goals and again move the needle globally.
So agriculture, energy, circular economy, and transportation and logistics. I want to dig into one example related to energy, where McDonald's and you personally really showed some leadership. So this summer, you led an effort that resulted in getting more than 30 companies, including McDonald's, Cargill, PepsiCo, Tyson Foods, and others, on an open letter to Congress asking for support for clean energy as part of COVID recovery funding. And this action earned the top rating in EDF's climate authenticity meter. So I would just love to know, why did McDonald's decide to do this? And tell us a little bit about how you made it happen.
That's a great question. And quite frankly, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but this was such a big collaborative effort across both internal as well as external partners. And quite frankly, Victoria, it started from one of our first conversations around this particular issue, about the need to speak out about climate issues, in particular energy, during a time of when we were negotiating COVID relief. And I took that conversation and ultimately went to my internal sustainability team. We have a world-class team, Emma Cox, who leads our energy group, and she and I talked about it, and we ultimately felt that this was a good opportunity for us to weigh in as a company to support the renewable energy industry. And so it was that initial contact with you, and then ultimately internally for us to determine that this made sense. Once we decided it made sense for us, we turned to our external partners. We looked to the 4 trades who are working in the renewable energy space. We looked to other companies, like-minded companies who are partners. And we looked to leaders like yourself, Victoria, at NGOs. And it was, again, a very collaborative, thoughtful effort to ensure that ultimately what we were doing, the policies that we were recommending, would be helpful to the case, to members of Congress and their staff, that listen, COVID is certainly a tragedy and something that we need to address, but climate and energy shouldn't fall to the wayside, and this should be part of the discussion as well, because folks in the energy industry, particularly renewable energy industry, certainly were facing tough times too. So we made that case together as a group, and ultimately, as you mentioned, we had over 30 companies weigh in and sign that letter and send it to Senate and House leadership, and it was received well.
Talk a little bit more about the response that you got from lawmakers, maybe media and other stakeholders, and how that conversation has continued to evolve.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it was received well on the Hill. Certainly the members and the staff who have been working on these issues appreciated hearing from the corporate voice. They've heard from the usual suspects when it comes to renewable energy, but to hear from the buyers, the corporate buyers, was a nice addition to the overall echo chamber there about the importance of renewable energy and supporting renewable energy workers during this pandemic. And so I think that was very much appreciated. Along with the trades. The trades have been at this for a long time, the phenomenal trades who work in this space. And so again, to have another voice was helpful for them as well. So overall, I think it was received well. There was some good earned media that came with this as well, which we certainly appreciated, but certainly not the reason why we do these types of things.
So talk a little more, John, about some of the other climate-related policies that you have been working on.
It's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, we developed our environmental sustainability policy principles, of which there's 4 areas. So certainly I mentioned energy, and we've been working in the energy space. My goal from my position at McDonald's is to build out a portfolio of legislation to support those policy spaces. Another area in which we've engaged is in the agriculture space. And we supported for the first time publicly a bill in the agricultural space around sustainability that was led by Senator Stabenow and Senator Braun. It was a great bipartisan, thoughtful bill that really supported farmers to encourage them ultimately to engage in sustainable practices. And we felt it was a great fit for McDonald's based on the fact that we do feed 69 million people a day. And so we were excited to partner with the senators and with the various trades who supported the bill. And it was a great first step in introducing sustainability into the agriculture space. And we look forward ultimately to building on this piece of legislation and looking for more opportunities with Senator Brown and Stabenow.
That's great to hear. I want to dig in a little bit more on what are the organizational elements that need to be in place for a company to be effective as an advocate for climate policy. You mentioned collaboration with the sustainability team. Talk about some of these organizational aspects that you think are important.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and such an important question. I mentioned earlier I joined McDonald's 3 years ago, and that was right before we announced our science-based targets. And in joining the company at that point, it was clear that the CEO all the way down had made that commitment to the environment. And I think that's absolutely critical for anybody to be successful in policy, is to have leadership from the top say, this is absolutely a priority. And we just actually recommitted to that priority this week, announcing a new leadership campaign. And so we're really excited to continue our work within the climate space. And it has to come from the top. And then from there, it's really working internally with your colleagues, showing to them, in the sustainability space, how you can be helpful to them and to their goals, and how a partnership could be overall beneficial to the company. So building that internal coalition with the sustainability team, with the legal team, with supply chain, with other members of the corporate relations team, it goes across a lot of different departments within a company. And our company in particular has so many talented people within different departments who recognize the importance of this. And so building those coalitions internally has been something that we're certainly proud of it as a team at McDonald's. And then ultimately too, looking to develop partnerships externally. McDonald's over the last several years has built different relationships with NGOs here in DC. Victoria, you're certainly one of the who I would call not only a close friend, but an important ally in the climate space. And so building those relationships and showing folks here in DC that McDonald's is serious about this and is willing to lean in on policy issues. So I think that's certainly incredibly important. And then ultimately too, what's important is developing the relationships on the Hill. The amount of times I've been to the Hill where folks have said to me, oh, I didn't know McDonald's cared about climate. And why would McDonald's care about climate? And then to see their looks when I explain to them the efforts that we're making in the space, and that aha moment is not only enjoyable, but it's rewarding. And it's important because you want to build those relationships with the lawmakers and their staff so that ultimately you become what you hope will be a trusted partner and a resource to them as they develop legislation. We have so much wealth of knowledge here at McDonald's with a company of our size, and we want to be able to share that experience and that knowledge with folks on the Hill. And so we'll continue to look forward to doing that.
Well, I thank you for those efforts. And I think it is really important for lawmakers to see how seriously businesses like McDonald's take climate change, and how addressing climate change, both through their own greenhouse gas reductions and through public policy, is essential to solving the problem. So looking ahead, John, we have a new administration and Congress coming in January. What opportunities do you see starting in 2021 to advance climate policies?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, President-elect Biden has made it clear that climate is one of his top priorities. And so you're going to see a shift here in DC between the White House and the House that will continue to stay climate as the top priority in terms of the overall dialogue here in DC and the importance of climate change. And so you'll see this issue elevated in a way that we haven't seen over the last several years. So that in itself is very exciting. Now, ultimately, we're in a situation now where it's presumed that we'll have a divided DC, meaning we'll have a President-elect Biden in the White House, a Senate controlled by Senator Mitch McConnell, and a House controlled by Speaker Pelosi. And so certainly before the election, what we saw was a really aggressive agenda driven by legislation as well as executive orders. Now that it's a divided government, what we'll probably see is a lot more action on the executive order side, and then certainly hopefully some success on the legislative side, but it will certainly have to be a bipartisan effort similar to that of the legislation that we supported by Senator Braun and Stabenow. And so we'll be working with the administration, with the Senate and the House to find where those opportunities are in the climate, in the energy space, and look forward to working with them in what I think will be a very aggressive and successful years ahead.
So can you talk a little bit more about how you see McDonald's role and the role of businesses in driving progress?
Yeah.
What are the opportunities there?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You know, and I mentioned this earlier, it's important for businesses to have their voice heard on the Hill, especially with members who might not be as comfortable with climate change and feel that it's something that's feel good. I think it's important for business to make clear that certainly while our customers may ask us to pursue these policies, there's a business case to be had. And that business case needs to be made clear on the Hill. And so I think companies have a unique role in making sure folks understand that. And so from McDonald's perspective, we plan on pursuing policies in the four areas that I've mentioned earlier. And we're really excited about telling that story and bringing folks along. And I think one other area I do want to flag in terms of external partners, I think like-minded companies are critically important as well in developing relationships there and finding opportunities with companies to really advance issues that are mutually beneficial. And so I've been working hard to find opportunities and develop relationships with colleagues like my, other GR colleagues to find opportunities to work together. And so collectively as coalitions, I think we can make a much bigger impact.
That's great. And I completely agree with you on the importance of business voices to drive progress. I think businesses play a really powerful role in shaping public policy, and I think their contribution is essential if we're going to find lasting solutions to the climate crisis. EDF and other environmental groups have put forward this leadership framework on climate policy advocacy that we call our AAA framework. And the 3A stand for advocate for policies consistent with achieving net zero emissions, align trade associations with that same goal, and allocate financial contributions to advance public policy, climate policy, and not obstruct it. Can you talk a little bit more about the trade association piece and kind of you mentioned the broader ecosystem of companies and making connections with your government relations colleagues. What role do you see industry groups playing in driving progress?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely critically important. And I think it's important for companies who are members of these trades to ensure what these trades are advocating for align with your goals and your principles. And so I think every member of these trades have a responsibility to ensure that the message that the trades are giving on the Hill align with the messages that the companies are given. And so from a McDonald's standpoint, we'll certainly continue to work with our trades in order, especially in this new environment, to really find opportunities where, as a company and ultimately as a trade, we can lead in climate and energy related policies in the coming years. So I'm really excited to work with our trades and to have an open dialogue, and quite frankly, hopefully to bring people along with us as we pursue some new policies.
Thank you for that. You know, you've learned a tremendous amount coming into McDonald's for the last 3 years, not just about the climate issue, but climate policy and how to be an effective advocate. What advice do you have for other companies that are considering playing more of a role in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. My first advice ultimately is to look within and to really start building coalitions and collaboration among your internal departments and teams in order to get buy-in ultimately into what you're doing and ensuring that they understand how policy can ultimately help them and help achieve their goals. So I think that's critically important. And as I mentioned earlier, our sustainability team is just a phenomenal group of individuals who really understand the importance of policy. So that just made my job that much easier. And then ultimately, once doing so, you look again to your external partners. And we touched on that earlier, Victoria, where we've talked about NGOs, we've talked about trades, we talked about like-minded companies, and we talked about ultimately staffers and members on the Hill, and really introducing yourself and sharing your story with them and looking for opportunities to collaborate and to move legislation. But it all starts from within, and ultimately it starts from the top.
Well, before we close, John, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, listen, I really appreciate this opportunity, Victoria. As I mentioned at the outset, EDF has been a great partner to McDonald's, not only in my tenure, certainly, but we go way back to the clamshell. And we're a partner in helping us eliminate the clamshell. And I'm so glad that we've come full circle and we're able to talk about other issues, including renewable energy, as well as agriculture and sustainability in agriculture. So our partnership and our work together certainly means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to the company. So I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, well, back at you. And McDonald's was really present at the creation for the first NGO corporate partnership. And that was actually what led to the creation of what is now the EDF Plus business program. So that decades of partnership means a lot to us as well. So this has been a great conversation, John. My takeaways are ambitious sustainability goals, effective policy advocacy, and strong partnerships. All of that adds up to a really powerful response to the climate crisis. So thank you so much for your time today and for your leadership.
Thank you.